Hey man, how's it going?
All good, yeah. Waiting for 325 forever. But yeah,
Yeah, thank you
excited.
for being here today.
Yeah, thanks for having me on.
Hell yeah. So you're Dreamcore, right? A content
Yep,
creator on YouTube,
that's me.
and that's you. And I remember first seeing you. I think it was like somewhere here. It was about, I want to say something about Glorious Vanity or Petrified Blood for the first time. It was back when I looked into my Toxic Rain Pathfinder with Petrified Blood, all that going on. And you have a really good way of explaining things in general, and you have a really good insights on defensive mechanics. What would you say is your channel for in general? What do you like to do?
Mainly, I mean, I do have a big focus on defensive mechanics because that's just something that I'm really interested in the game.
Yeah.
But generally, I just like to talk about how mechanics interact with each other because I think there's a lot of things that are really easily misunderstood in the game. There's so many misconceptions, about different things. So, yeah, it's just generally explaining how mechanics work and then talking about interesting interactions that exist with items and things like that.
Okay. And if you had to like name some of those misconceptions, what would come to mind for you?
Well, one of the really big ones is like damage calculation in the character sheet for things like armor, which is just and even evasion with how much you're going to evade or how much damage reduction you have. People look at their estimated damage reduction, for armor, and they think that that's the damage reduction they're going to get to every hit that's coming in.
Yeah. So
And
you're talking
that is
about phase damage reduction around here, for example,
exactly,
right?
yeah.
So if I put in
Yeah, that
plus 50,000 to armor or something, and
Yeah.
then I increase, I mean, 50,000 maybe a little bit too much. Let's do 20,000,
like
and then I
tw- yeah,
increase
20,
the
20,000.
enemy skill physical damage to like, yeah, and all of a sudden it drops from 90 to 65.
Yeah, and obviously in the character sheet, how it's working is it's giving you an average monster of that level with like an auto attack, right? And then it's calculating your armor versus that attack.
Yeah.
And obviously armor is better when it's against smaller hits. It provides more mitigation, and against larger hits, it provides a lot less mitigation. So I think that's something that is not explained well at all in the game, and something that's just so easy to misunderstand.
I think that's also an issue of, I mean, PoB is an awesome tool, but it is one of those tools where if you don't know the basics of the game, it's really hard to use it correctly, right?
Yeah.
It deludes you into thinking certain things. Because, for example, it would be obvious for me to think if I put in Pinnacle Boss, it's going to be a girthy fizz hit or something, right? But then there's way crazier outliers in the game, right? So if you go to Uber
exactly.
Pinnacle Boss, I mean, sure, the damage goes to like 3,000 or something. It's like, I don't know about that, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, it's a little bit
Yeah,
awkward.
there's a lot of that in the game. Yeah, it's I mean, the game could do a much better job of explaining these things. I think, like especially armor and evasion's another one. It's obviously just taking a monster of that level, taking their accuracy that they have. But there's so many monster modifiers and things in the game. You just never know what you're going to encounter in a map. Yes, they could explain the stat, but the player still wouldn't really know what they're going to interact with in a map. So it's difficult. Yeah.
It also depends on the situation, right? Like if you do expedition and you're fully, like you don't have blade immunity and you're fully reliant on your evade chance, and literally every single time you have hits can't be evaded on your remnants, then it's going to be a little bit of an issue, right? So
Yeah.
and tier 17s have kind of exposed that as well, right? Like the more layers you have, in a sense, the better you're off, but in a sense, the more mods you also have that destroy your build, kind of, right?
Exactly, yeah. So you take out, I mean, some builds are fully reliant on one defensive layer. And then as soon as that layer is completely not working, for example, spell suppression does nothing, then you're just getting one shot by something. So tier 17s are one of those, they're almost a little bit like Valdo's maps in that way, that they're just, I wasn't really expecting them to do that, kind of like put these modifiers in that are basically all or nothing modifiers, because that doesn't really exist anywhere else in the game.
Exactly. Yeah, that's actually it's like immunities almost, right? Like where you're like, what does this do in the game? It's weird, yeah.
Yeah, I'm not a big fan of that on tier 17s. I think on Valdos, it's perfect. It makes so much sense on Valdos.
They're neat. You know what you're signing up for. Tier 17s are weird in a way where they are meant to be played, because they're literally called tier 17s, which is a new player would assume, oh, now I go from tier 16 to tier 17, not, oh, this is something very specific that I have to have insane amount of currency into my build to do it, right?
Yeah, it's a little bit weird, those modifiers, but maybe they're going to change them. We'll see.
What do you think about like effective hit pool versus max hit taken? What do you think like the relationship is there with people kind of misunderstanding what's going on there?
I think a lot of it actually comes down to block in a lot of cases. People have some like block in their build, even like a little bit of block, and suddenly their effective hit just jumps up like crazy, because what the calculation is doing is it's saying, you're taking these hits, and if you have 30% block, well, 30% of those hits are doing no damage to you, and therefore, your effective hit pool jumps up like crazy. It's only really useful when you're talking to it in context of like, you're doing a map that's pretty juiced and you have like a very reliable block chance or something, and you have a lot of other defensive layers as well, because, only relying on block is not a great idea.
Yeah.
But yeah, otherwise, you want to be looking at your max hit, because that is the number that determines whether a hit kills you or not ultimately. So if your max hit is low, and oftentimes with a lot of builds, the max hit problem usually comes from physical damage. You basically either solve it with like damage taken as is a really popular way at the moment. And a lot of builds just can't really get enough armor. We go back to that problem with armor scaling. And, there's so many ways to deal with elemental damage now, even though like most monster damage numbers in the game for elemental damage are much higher because of resistances. Like, there's just so many ways to deal with elemental damage, and even chaos damage as well.
That you almost just want to convert, and just counter that way. Yeah, I mean, it's interesting because for me, it's kind of like at a certain point, you definitely want avoidance. Some form of avoidance should be on almost every build because it's just cheap, right? It's like very rarely actually do you die from a one-shot. It's like most people think it's a one-shot, but it actually is more of an issue with recovery, or it's an issue with your avoidance, right? Like, being able to just slam on a little bit of evasion and a Jade Flask and having 50% avoidance is absolutely crazy. But it doesn't make you so involved with avoidance that all of a sudden, if an enemy has like can just go through your evasion, doesn't just one-shot you, right? So you can have to set your max hit to a certain point, and after that you can kind of look at it. But for example, as a bow character, not having evasion is a death like sentence. But on non-bow characters, for example, if you just have 30-40% chance to block, that is already okay in terms of avoidance, and you can rather maybe look into armor and stuff like that, right?
Yeah, exactly. And like a lot of the physical damage is coming in from those monster attacks. So if you got like you said, 30-35% chance to block, that's a huge amount of mitigation in a mapping environment.
And that's a little bit of an issue with me with block in general, is it's so much investment for something that doesn't increase your max hit. That is like like, okay, spell suppression is actually pretty easy to get nowadays. Every build has spell suppression. If the squishiest of builds have spell suppression, it's easy to get, right? Like, I see people in the top 50 DPS on Pure Ninja have 100% spell suppression. I'm like, okay, that's crazy. But block is an investment, right? Like, the nodes are so expensive, and getting to 75% is such a huge investment, right?
Yeah, it's hard to invest in block on pretty much any character that isn't a necromancer. It's like, you're going to go, I mean, okay, gladiator, but...
Well, yeah, that's what I was gonna say next, right? Like this old node here that basically converted your attack block to spell block was what held block together almost. And now it's like gone. Block is kind of gone as well. It's kind of weird.
Yeah, the death of gladiator, sad.
Yeah,
but maybe it's coming back next league. Who knows?
Maybe. Here's hoping. Let's hope Assassin also gets the all damage can poison, right, from Ruthless.
But yeah, block is just, I think a lot of people make that comparison between block and spell suppression, because it's the left side of the tree kind of has a lot of access to block and spell block, attack block, and the right side of the tree is lots of evasion and spell suppression. But spell suppression is just the superior stat there. When you look, if you just look at those four things, that it's kind of ridiculous. So and then there's like glancing blows, which is
they nerfed.
Yeah,
ever since the 65, but although like with 50%, it would kind of be like a no-brainer. At that point, they could, I don't know. It's like, I understand why they nerfed it, but
it should probably be like 55%. So because 65 is so most of the time when you take glancing blows, you're just losing. You're basically taking more damage than you otherwise would have. The best way to make use of that keystone is if you have some kind of recovery and you're not going to die from those hits, then that's good if you have recovery on block. But otherwise, a lot of the time you click that node and you're actually taking more damage now than you were.
I honestly also think they could buff it just because Aegis fell a little bit out of favor now that we have instant leech again, right? Like, ever since instant leech is back, Aegis kind of lost a little bit of its charm, I would say.
Yeah, they basically moved it over to the core tree, and then everybody was using it in that patch, and then they nerfed it. I think the nerf was a little bit heavy-handed, but...
pretty rough. But to be fair, literally everybody was using it, right? Like it was.
Yeah, it was insane.
It was.
But it was also the time when that happened. At the time when Glancing Blows was moved onto the core tree, the access to defenses in the game was just so limited. It was actually ridiculous. So we had armor and evasion hadn't been reworked at that point.
Oh, so it was before spell suppression even, right?
Yeah, no spell suppression.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of these defensive mechanics that have come into the game now, things like Fourth Vow, things like armor and energy shield mastery for armor being applied to chaos damage, none of those things existed. So it was... Block was just really good then. Block and dodge, obviously. On the right side of the tree, you would just go attack and spell dodge.
Yeah, dodge here. Everybody would just take acro, phase acro. Yeah, that was definitely interesting times, but also very squishy times, yeah.
Yeah, it was all or nothing defenses, basically. You either take no damage or you die.
In terms of, like, players and their defenses and what they usually like, one of the problems I have with, for example, League starters is how tanky do I want to go? Because a lot of people think, oh, he doesn't go tanky, he's just like evil or something, he doesn't want to be tanky, but it's always a trade-off, right? It's like you're sacrificing something to be tankier, and that something might have been more important than being tankier. And what I noticed is some people are super fine with being squishy, and some people are like need to be extremely tanky. They will literally play a ballista build, run into the middle of the pack before they start placing their ballistas, and then just chill there, right? And they want to be able to tank everything. How do you kind of like approach that in your content where you understand that there's different kind of players, and what would you recommend for people to do kind of in those situations where, I don't know, maybe they feel too squishy on every build?
It's definitely a player perspective thing, as you'd highlighted on there. It's like some people don't really care if they have a really squishy build. They'd rather invest everything into damage. And I think that whole sentiment definitely comes from that old PoE that we were just talking about there, where investment into defenses just
was useless.
Feel like it was worth it. It really didn't feel like it was worth it.
It was literally phase acro, and everything else, a few life nodes, and you're done. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think that GGG have done a really good job ever since the huge nerf patch in 3.15 and then 3.16 when they kind of reworked Determination and Grace and added spell suppression. And ever since then, they've been adding more and more mechanics into the game that players actually want to invest in because they're actually good defenses once you get invested into them. So if you're someone who you feel like you're squishy on builds, but you do want to build into defenses, start to kind of think about different damage types. So, I mean, physical damage is a real problem for a lot of builds, especially those right-hand side builds. And more recently, we've had buffs to damage taken as gear. That's why Lightning Coil has become really popular. Cloak of Flame is great as well. Basically, if you have like a mix of things to deal with each damage type. So for armor, you could just, take Determination, you have a little bit of armor. Even if you don't have like a lot of armor scaling, if you combine that with Lightning Coil or with a Cloak of Flame, suddenly you are massively improving your mitigation against physical damage, which is one of those huge problems. For those right-hand side builds, like as soon as they get to mapping, that's what's chunking them most of the time, is the physical damage.
Yeah, and I guess I would add an early Granite Flask can be really relevant. Like
huge.
A Granite and a percentage armor roll early on, that's enough armor to tank, like to give you like 50-60% damage reduction.
Yeah, it's a massive difference.
It's massive, yeah.
I play a lot of left side builds like Chieftain and things like that, Leaguestart. I like to I'll be running a Granite Flask and a Jade Flask. I won't have any kind of Grace or anything, but just running that Jade Flask means that I'm not going to get hit.
Jade Flask is Jade Flask is almost always. That's why whenever I see people run what's it called, Unwavering Stance, it's kind of there's a bit of a trade-off there. Lightning Coil is definitely one of those things where something I guess people also don't realize is how much better Fizz damage taken as gets the more you get. So kind of getting towards 80, 90, 100% is actually pretty crazy. I think there's also a thing where you actually need to get to 101% or something. I forgot why that was. Was it because of Bleed or something?
Yeah, well,
I don't exactly remember.
We think that's a bug at the moment. We think it's a bug.
Mm-hmm.
Because how it's supposed to work with damaging ailments is that the calculation is on the attacker's side, not on the defender's side. So it should be that even if you take a hit of physical damage that would bleed you and you take none of that damage as physical, it should still inflict bleeding. That came from a developer who actually said that. So
okay.
But we've had absolutely no word on it at all, and it's been bugged for leagues at this point. So maybe it's just not a bug, and maybe internally it's changed at some point. But for the thing with damage taken as, and obviously going back to armor as well, if you have damage taken as, obviously like you said, it gets better and better the more you have of it. But also if you have even a little bit of armor, because the damage that you're taking now is being taken majority of, lightning, for example, with lightning coil, or maybe cloak of flame, you're taking it as fire. That remaining physical damage is smaller, which means that the armor that you have is then more effective against that resulting smaller hit. Which is
so I guess that's also a misconception where people think it's either one or the other, but a mixture is often actually quite potent.
Exactly. So mixtures are really strong.
Another big part of your content, especially lately, where you've popped up in my inbox a lot, is your Forgotten Unique series that has kind of been a mainstay on your channel. And I really like this series, namely because a lot of old uniques kind of get forgotten, like you say in the title, literally. And putting them in context in a new setting can often reinvigorate a lot of new ideas, right? For example, when I played Kitava's first this Leaguestart, I was surprised by, I looked into a lot of the old uniques, and I was surprised by how many are not used, even though they're very, very close to actually being strong.
Being good, yeah, exactly. Yeah. I think that series, for me, like when I first sort of thought of the idea of doing that series, I really had the idea in my mind that I wanted to kind of inspire people to make builds with these items, because it's like there are so many new mechanics coming into the game every league, like lots of new unique items and things, and I think a lot of this stuff people just completely forget about it, because like there's new things coming in, it's the new flavor, this is what's popular now. But there's such a huge backlog of stuff that people have forgotten about, and in a lot of cases, yes, these items are a bit weaker than what we're using right now. That's kind of how it is, and some of these things do need buffing, but I think it is fun to look at these things in the context of what we have in the game now and see what's possible, because a lot of people do enjoy that. That's why a lot of people play PoE, is because of just all of the possibilities that we have. So yeah, it's fun to look at those in the context of what we have access to in the current PoE.
It's also like one of these knowledge, I wouldn't say knowledge gaps, but I feel like a lot of people don't think this is really important game knowledge, knowing all the uniques. But like whenever a new patch comes out, it's so much easier to apply what's being said in there and finding old stuff if you already know what's going on, right? So videos like this really help understanding the game as well. And for everybody who's like starting out, I would really just tell them to go and look through lists of uniques and let you just see what's available, right?
Yeah, exactly. Like I remember when I first started playing, and that experience of learning things for the first time, and you see one mechanic, and then it leads you to another, and it leads you to another, and by the time you know it, there's like 50 tabs open on your browser,
Yeah.
And yeah, with uniques, it's just like that. You're kind of going down this rabbit hole, and there's like so many uniques and doing all these crazy things, and you're just thinking all these possibilities. It's just it's super exciting, and that's one of the things that I really, really enjoy whenever a new league comes out. It's one of my favorite things about a new league is knowing that there are new unique items coming, because it's always happening. There's always these new unique items. I mean, this league we just had a bunch of new Uber drops. We had things like the Apostate, which was just insane.
A banger. Yeah, I think you made a video on that, right? Like a life stacker.
I did, yeah. The Apostate is a really cool item. What I really like about that item is the fact that they chose it to be a body armor, because they could have had this, it could have been like a jewel or something. Maybe it would have been a bit weaker in that case, or it could have been a different slot. But with it being the body armor, you're basically saying you're going to be fully reliant on life stacking, because
which is rough.
You can't use yeah, it is rough. Yeah, it's rough. It is. It absolutely is.
Yeah.
But it's an item that makes a lot of sense in that way, that you're basically all in at that point. And this is like the prime example of a Path of Exile unique item for me. It's just it's everything that I think.
It changes the way you play, right? Like, yeah.
Exactly. It completely defines a build.
Good uniques also make for different rare gear, right? Like, it also influences the choices of rare gears that you have. For example, I don't know, if you have Omni, right? All of a sudden it's like, every attribute, right? Like, you're just gonna stack, and you see items that you would otherwise not see. That's like the allure for me. When it comes to like Apostate, I guess it's the same problem as on Strength Stacker. It's like life as your only defense is just pretty damn rough. It's like I guess Strength Stacker also has block, but we already talked about how block is unreliant a little bit, right? But in general, the problem I often have with uniques in PoE is some of them really feel outdated, and you want to make them work, and you make the PoB, and you're like, oh, the only bad thing about this, I don't know, so-and-so unique build is the unique, right? And if I just take out the unique and I just use, I don't know, Rebuke of the Vaal, right? Like, the build starts with Rebuke of the Vaal, and at some point you realize, I can probably for 2 divines make a better weapon, and your build is just, I don't know, vanilla as fuck again, right?
This is one of the things that I think what I would really like to see from GDG is a big balance pass across a lot of the unique items, because I think every league, the content is creeping up. You know, there's always more and more things to do. Everything's getting harder over time. And these unique items are just kind of left behind because, you know, the rare items are the things that are being kept up with things like Eldritch implicits and stuff like that are, you know, synthesized implicits, corrupted implicits, all this stuff that, you know, continuously can power creep those items.
Yeah.
And in the case of unique items, although some of them are very, very strong and build defining, there's a lot of them that are really interesting and fun, but they're just not quite good enough. You know, and like you said, you could use them if you wanted to, and you would basically be gimping yourself a little bit because
at that point, what's the point? Yeah, exactly. That's also an interesting topic, I guess, in general. When it comes to crafting leagues and stuff like that, I feel like GGG doesn't really use uniques all that much in those leagues. It's mostly rares that just get overpowered. I mean, once again, Necropolis is just one of the examples, right? Recombinators in Sentinel, like Harvest, right? It always feels like uniques kind of get left out. Maybe they're too afraid of stuff. Do you think there is a lot of design space there where they could make maybe a league where uniques matter more?
Would be really interesting if they'd done something with uniques. They tried to do it a little bit with Crucible. I think Crucible is a league that a lot of people.
But they were also harder to make, right? You had to like chance orb them.
Exactly. See, I wasn't a fan of that. I'm not sure why they just made that decision that uniques were harder to sort of build trees on. I mean, is there space there for it? Yeah, absolutely. I think they could do some crazy stuff with uniques, you know, in terms of like a crafting league. I mean, imagine a league where you could like take a modifier from one unique and like somehow smash it onto another unique or something like that, like some kind of crazy.
It's interesting that you say that because that's what both Last Epoch and, for example, Torchlight now as well are doing. Last Epoch basically lets you, with LP, get normal stats on your legendaries, right? On your uniques. And Torchlight has kind of like a middle thing where all their legendaries are now basically they trimmed all the fat from all of them and only put in the 2 to 3 unique mods that are on each legendary, and the rest is craftable, just with normal crafting. They're basically like rares with 2 to 3 fixed affixes that are unique and have upsides, downsides, and everything else. So where, for example, I don't know, a PoE item, like, I don't know, let's say Chaos Spirit or something. You have Chaos Spirit, and there's some random mods in there, right? You obviously have the regenerate rage per second for every 300 recovery, right? But all the other mods are kind of weird. It's like life, fire rays, and depending on if you actually need those mods, it makes them better or worse for your build. So what Torchlight Infinite did is just like trim all that fat. They would only keep the last 2 mods, and then the rest you could just craft yourself. I think that
would be crazy. Like that would be so much fun if they basically, like you said, they took away the mods that are not unique, right? The ones that are actually unique to that item.
Yeah.
Keep them on there, like something, and then you can actually build really interesting unique items. I mean, why not do something like that and experiment? They don't seem to have a problem with things being completely overpowered from leagues and then, you know, moving on into
toning it down. Exactly.
I'd love to see that with you, because unique item design in PoE is something that's just so fun. It's you know, it's amazing that they continuously come out with crazy unique items. Like the design space, you'd think it's completely fooled by now, but it's just crazy.
I'm just fascinated because if I look at other ARPGs that are very concerned about their balance and whatnot, right? A lot of these games kind of make the builds themselves and then just kind of sell you the illusion that you made the build, right? The devs kind of make the builds for you with their uniques. But in this game, they just release Nemesis, right? It's like, just like, okay, let's see what happens, right? Like, that's crazy. That, like, if you see other games, you know that would never happen.
Yeah, I remember watching, I think it was Harishi in an interview, and he was talking about how they'll make a unique item, and internally they have discussion about, you know, what builds could come out of this item. But sometimes the item will just sit dormant for maybe even years at a time, and then suddenly there will be like this crazy build that someone finds, sometimes even with mechanics that have existed for leagues and leagues at a time. Someone just finds it, and that's kind of the beauty of unique items. They're just like, there's so many of them, and a lot of people just completely forget about them, and then all of a sudden there's this crazy mechanic, crazy interaction, and there you go. It's suddenly everyone's using it. So yeah, it's fun.
In general, definitely looking forward to every single of your episodes there. In general, when it comes to content creation, where do you kind of want to go now? Where you what's your end goal? Do you want to do this full time? Is it kind of like a hobby on the side?
I think it'd be fun to do it full time. I'm not sure how much the channel will grow. It's hard to say, really. I mean, with Path of Exile 2 coming up, there's always a completely new game to get into. A lot of the mechanics we already know are going to be completely different, like ailments are being changed, stun threshold and things like that is completely being changed. There's going to be tons of unique items. So I think a lot of the case it would be more of the same for most things. I should think just like more dives on items. You know, one of the things that I do really enjoy doing is looking over other people's builds. That's like something that I really enjoy doing. Just covering someone's build. Like there's some crazy build.
That's some of your most popular videos, right?
Yeah,
yeah.
Like that one there, Konagi's Pathfinder with the 55% resistances. I mean, that was just completely crazy. Nobody at that point, as far as I was aware, had done that, and it was just like the guy just made a crazy build, and it's just really fun to cover that sort of stuff because, you know, it's always with other players' creativity, and a lot of the time these builds don't really get the spotlight, so it's nice to make a video like that and kind of immortalize it in a way.
So in general, you're going to continue this series, I guess.
Yeah, I'll be doing a lot of the same. Yeah.
Yeah. When it comes to PoE 2, do you look forward to it? I think you made some content on PoE 2 recently as well.
Yeah, I've done a little bit of PoE 2 content. I think for a while I was a bit cynical of PoE 2 because I think that, especially after they announced that it was a separate game, there was a bit of a strange feeling there where they had been saying for a while that some of these things like Melee is a big one, right? They have been saying that, you know, PoE 2 is coming and it's going to sort of fix Melee. I mean, a lot of people had that in their minds, right? That it's going to fix Melee, and now it's not going to happen. So what happens to Melee in PoE 1 now, we don't know. But from what I've seen with Path of Exile 2, especially recently, I think I'm just excited to play the game. I think it looks great. It looks very different.
Yeah.
And it is going to be a very different game. I think ultimately it is going to be very different even once we get into it and get to Endgame and things like that. But different is not necessarily bad. So I think it's going to be a fun game once it gets here.
Yeah, I think so as well. Like I've big hopes for GGG in general. Like, I mean, having played PoE for like over a decade, I cannot imagine a world where this game, even if it's bad on release, right? Even if that actually happens, I cannot imagine them leaving it in a bad state. It just doesn't.
Yeah.
They're just going to make it good eventually. The only fear I guess I have is that it is good for a lot of people, but not for me, where I'm just a little bit more in a different direction. Like Path of Exile definitely skews people a little bit from meticulous gameplay to more degenerate gameplay, right? So maybe I can't appreciate PoE 2 for what it is. That's definitely a fear. But otherwise, I'm kind of take it as it comes, and seems like you have a pretty similar approach.
I just want to like wait until I get in there so I can actually judge it for what it is. I think a lot of the time, like I have one really big concern for Path of Exile 2 is the hotkeys thing.
Yeah,
like if I'm not playing on controller, you know, is there just going to be way too many hotkeys to press? It's just been a concern and it's basically ever since they added WASD and now we kind of know that WASD is going to be the go-to way to play the game because if you're not doing it, you're kind of at a disadvantage in a way. So yeah, I just want to get in there and play it, really. I'm just excited to get in there and try out.
Yeah, sounds good. Overall, yeah, love your channel. Happy you're in the community making content even so late in the league. Thank you for being here, and it was a good chat.
I appreciate that. Yeah, thanks for having me on. Been really fun.
Man. See you around.
Cheers.